Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, the stepping stones towards Khalistan fall into place as the Sikh Federation International formally comes into existence. Politicians start applying pressure on the UK government with the formation of a new cross-party group aimed at freeing British citizens illegally detained, including, of course, Jaggi. In the aftermath of another pro-Khalistan activist shot dead in the Punjab, the finger of suspicion points towards the Indian state once again. We take a look at the ongoing Canadian inquiry into foreign interference, and India's name crops up once again, unsurprisingly. And our two humped camels, the technology of India's future high-altitude defence. All this and more in today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our Canadian viewers out there. Our American friends, you may not know it's Thanksgiving today in Canada because your politicians don't speak about Thanksgiving in Canada. And I think the simple fact is that we don't pardon turkeys at the White House. In any event, back to you, Angus.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at lots of your great comments which have been filling up below the video, so thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get going. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
An interesting story, Angus. I was looking this up and doing some research on the use of two humped camels in the Indian military. They are using them for research, and this is something that's bringing back the ages of the old Silk Route. They just haven't done it since then in terms of herding them and using them for official purposes. And back at that time, they were used, of course, for transfer and transport of silk, as well as the people doing the trade. Now, today, it's a lot different because they are actually looking to use them at high altitudes when it comes to defense and border patrols. These animals are quite unique in that they can go several weeks without needing to eat. They can also eat at higher altitudes. Of course, the plants, the grass, everything is much smaller at higher elevations because of the decreased oxygen levels and such. But they can actually feed on it, so it really makes them a durable option. Now, when you look at other options that people would automatically think of in technology, they're thinking drones, aircraft, ATVs, and other off-road vehicles. Now, the problem with those is that with these summits, they are made up in many areas of a very soft sand. Now, this makes it difficult for the land-based vehicles. The weather, the winds, and unpredictability of storms at those high elevations, of course, make it more difficult for drones and unmanned aerial vehicles. So this is really what they're looking at. Now, unfortunately, the two-humped camel, also known as a Bactrian, is actually making up only about 6% of the world's camel population. When you look at the actual 6%, though, the domestic ones are the ones that are making up the majority of that population by a large amount, and up over the 90% range. When I say domesticated, I don't mean that people have them in their houses like they do cats and dogs as family pets, but instead they are trained and utilized for everything from just local transportation and movements of goods, but also in terms of tourist attractions on the beaches and other areas for tourists. Now, the problem that they have in taming these wild ones, that they are not a pack mentality animal. So they have to overcome this in the training. They also need to look at the ways to train them to adjust them, not getting spooked when they are in military type situations where there may be machinery, guns, explosions, and that sort of thing. So they don't want the animals, of course, to be spooked and to panic. So there's a lot of training that goes on. And I was actually quite fascinated by the way that they do it. Now, over the years, they have utilized many other animals, and that includes the Zanskar ponies. They've used ox, they've used yaks, and different animals. Now, the yaks are also one that they are doing a lot of research and training with right now, because again, they have a great ability to stay warm in temperatures that hit like minus 40 degrees. So, of course, that is a very big benefit in those high altitudes with those weather conditions. They also have 3 times the red blood cells and very large capacity lung abilities. So this gives them the ability to breathe at the higher elevations where the oxygen is much thinner. So a lot of very interesting things that when you look at military development these days, most nations are turning to, stealth abilities on aircraft. They are looking at new ground-to-air weapons. They are looking at guns and other artilleries that can be used on land defenses and land battles. So to look and see that they are going back to an old school method of utilizing animals and training them was quite unique. Now, once again, of course, the different levels of altitude and such are a concern. So these definitely bring a new twist to it if they can find the benefits and find the ways to train them in an effective way, which they seem to be having definitely some breakthroughs and some success with. Now, as they continue with the various animals that they are working with, they also wanted to really take a look at the two-humped camel in terms of the fact that they are endangered. They are very limited in terms of the wild population. So they are going to put money and resources into the actual conservation and regeneration of the population. So that, again, is a benefit not only to India, but the world, because it's sad that it has taken them to utilize them in war, defense, and border patrols, among other things. But, it's sad to see that that's what it took in order to preserve a species that really is quite beautiful. And they might be a little funny looking with those humps, but I still think they are a beautiful animal, very strong. They can carry up to 150 kilogram loads in the last mile access. So where they are trying to get supplies and other materials into. As I stated earlier, of course, they can go for weeks without having to eat very much. So that, again, takes a load off of more animals that would have to be carrying those loads of feed in for the wildlife, or not for the wildlife, but for the trained animals such as the ponies and the yaks. So it's definitely a really interesting way to move about it. Now, this is used by the Northern Command, is who they are looking at utilizing a lot of these animals for, and the areas and terrain in which they are accessing. And I thought that it was a cool story to bring up also, because several members of the Northern Command were honored. Sikh regiment members were honored in 1948 for their bravery and outstanding service to the military. And we'll do a bit more of a story on these individuals tomorrow night, but I just thought that this was a different way for us to bring a news story and something different to the report and to the show. And how often do we get to talk about animals on here? So it's a great way. But if you look on the screen, you can also see the members of the Sikh regiment who were honored on this day in 1948 in Jammu and Kashmir. So again, Angus, kind of a different twist on what we normally cover, but I thought it was very interesting and kind of cool.
Indeed, and Sikhs have served for decades, if not even centuries, in the armed forces, and they've obviously many have been martyred, but they've always served with absolute distinction. They've been suitably decorated for their courage and bravery. Indeed, and another story to add to those huge annals of historic Sikhs who served in the armed forces. It's interesting hearing about the camels, because of course Ladakh is a very key region. It's a very strategic region for India, for J&K, for the whole of northwestern India. And of course, for central government in India, they poured a lot of resources, a lot of money, and a lot of military assets into this region. Primarily, of course, because of China just being over the border. It's a very, very difficult terrain to operate in. Of course, J&K, Kashmir, has been the location for a lot of friction between India and Pakistan for many reasons, not least the militant activity, but even just the main military forces facing off against each other, literally across mountainsides, and quite regularly shelling each other across the mountainside. So it does take a certain type of military training to operate in a very difficult, very harsh environment. Mountain training does form a large part of the Indian Army training. And of course, Sikhs will excel at that, being from where they are, of course. Interesting that they bring in these camels. I think this is a very sensible direction to look at, because even throughout many conflicts in the past, particularly the Second World War, mountainous terrain has always proved challenging, and any conflict, potential conflict with China, it's likely that a lot of that conflict could occur in friction high regions like Ladakh, and of course very mountainous territory. Now you try operating a large fleet of vehicles, diesel engined vehicles, in high altitudes, very cold temperatures in winter, and all the logistics, the supply chain required to resource a huge fleet of vehicles, very, very difficult. Now, as you rightly say, James, a herd of camels who can go for days, if not weeks, without actually feeding, who don't need their diesel engines warming up at night or in the mornings to get them going again. It could actually hand over a very, very important strategic advantage to the forces in that region. So yeah, it's although it's a nice story about animals, I think in terms of just simple military strategy, it's actually a fascinating innovation that I think, God forbid that ever a conflict does arise, it could just be that little extra advantage that could just win the day. So yeah, interesting one, that one, James.
Absolutely. And as I said, I mean, it's something that they haven't utilized these animals for since the Silk Route, going back, so far that they've actually lost the art of training them. So this is almost like they're going in blind and having to just learn all over again, the whole process and what works and what doesn't in training these animals. So it's kind of interesting that way. And it just shows, like we've talked so many times about the preservation of different cultures and histories. And, it's just another example of how important that can be in the future.
Indeed. And of course, the other one, the other element of that I didn't mention, of course, was the high altitude and the oxygen levels. You try getting a normally aspirated engine to operate at very high altitudes, and anybody who's tried that will realise it's very hard because there's a lot less oxygen feeding that carburettor. And the camel, of course, with that high red blood cell count, again, it can breathe perfectly happily and carry the loads over those mountain passes a lot easier than any normally aspirated engine could ever do, James.
Absolutely. And if you caught me at those high elevations, it would have to carry me and my oxygen tank for my lazy ass.
Indeed. Special training. That's what it's all about.
There you go. So as we're speaking about untrainable animals, Angus, let's move on to politics in Canada.
Good segue.
So, of course, the inquiry into foreign interference is ongoing, and the National Security and Intelligence Agency, the representative and I'm just going to pull that up there. So, as I said, the representative and advisor has actually come out and stated some interesting opinions at the inquiry as a witness. Now, I personally find question in what she is saying when it comes to the motives and operations of India. And the reason why this brings me concern is because she is looking at it that basically, India is more concerned with dealing with pro-Khalistan issues and the Sikh diaspora than they are about political interference. Now, this is a big concern because it makes me question whether or not they are actually blindsiding themselves and looking in the wrong direction, or at least not focusing on the big picture. They're focusing in on one issue, but not focusing in on the big issue or the bigger issue. Now, of course, we know that the importance and significance of protecting the Sikh diaspora on Canadian soil is of first and should be a first priority when it comes to saving lives. But we also need not lose sight of the fact that India is definitely involved in political interference. And for them to mitigate that or to reduce the impact and the resources going in that direction to investigate and monitor is and should be a concern to every Canadian and every politician. Now, I've pulled up a story that was reported by Matthew Cole on Tiger, and it's a short story, so I'll just kind of go through it quickly here. And it, again, just says that Natalie Druin expressed uncertainty about India's intentions to influence Canadian policy. Speaking before the public inquiry into foreign interference in federal electoral processes and democratic institutions, she suggested that India might be more focused on the pro-Khalistan movement. And of course, as I said, this is a huge importance to monitor, but at the same time, I think that she is not looking at the larger picture. She went on to emphasize the importance of understanding India's interest in Canada, citing the significant Sikh diaspora in the historical context of the Air India Flight 182 bombing. She went on to say this attack by Khalistani extremists, which occurred before the 9/11 attacks, remains the deadliest terrorist attack in Canadian history, killing all 329 passengers, including over 270 Canadians, mainly of Indian descent, and 24 Indians. Now, to me, this is, again, overlooking the bigger picture, because I personally am a strong believer that this investigation needs to start from zero and be completely reinvestigated for that incident. Whether or not it was a false flag by the India government intelligence agency, we do not know. And I don't say that lightly, because I know the impact that would have on the victims and the families of victims of the Air India disaster. But at the same time, I think that we owe it to all of the victims, their families, and the Sikh diaspora to get to the truth. Because if it was an India false flag, then what benefit is it of these organizations and agencies to continue putting the blame on the Sikh diaspora in terms of what they called extremists back in the 1980s? Once moreover, I would like to see that investigation be brought back and really be brought to the forefront with an open and transparent look at it to make sure that we've got the right people. Because back in the day, once again, don't forget that the Canadian intelligence, Canadian policing, and the other investigative teams were told to not include the government of India or their agencies within the realm of the investigation. So were very key details overlooked, were important, were important people overlooked. So I really think that we need to look at that and really understand the truth behind that tragedy for everybody's sake. The Canadian, and then it goes on to say that Canada is seeking accountability for the killing of pro-Khalistan figure Hardeep Singh Nijjar, which we follow very closely here, as this is right in my neighborhood. Relations between Canada and India deteriorated following Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statement in the House of Commons, which mentioned credible allegations linking India agents to the murder. 4 Indian nationals were arrested earlier this year, and as you know, we've been following the trial and the process as it moves through the courts. But India is still dismissing the allegations as absurd and motivated, and Canada has yet to publicly substantiate the claims, and the investigation continues. And that a lot has to do with the way the Canadian judicial system works, in that they don't release a lot of details before it gets brought to and before a judge and before the allegations and evidence is proven within a court of law. So that is something to keep in mind about it not being publicly released. But there has been a lot of evidence that's been released to the India government in attempts to get them to get off their ass and move forward on investigating their own people and their own agencies for their involvement. Druin noted that Canada expects India to take its law enforcement action seriously rather than denying the situation. She urged India to introspect the incident and avoid further escalation. Additionally, she recommended that the public inquiry consider both Niger's killing and the attempted murder of Gurpant Panoon, who was Mr. Niger's associate and the lead counsel for Sikhs for Justice. So this, again, was an attempt and an assassination plot against him last year. Now, in closing, she went on to comment on the June 4th report from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, also known as the NSCIOP, and that ranked India as second most significant foreign interference threat to Canada's democratic institutes. But she also said that she doesn't feel that the ranking of countries is constructive. And I would strongly disagree with that, because I think that without really focusing in on our resources and where we're allocating them to where the priority of threats are, I think is a big mistake. So I think that, yes, it is very constructive to rank them. It is very constructive to know where our threats are coming from and to counter those threats and investigate. So I really do think, but on the other hand, I do understand if she is meaning to the point that we don't want to focus so much, again, tunnel vision on one threat, that we don't keep an eye on all threats. So again, I'll play the devil's advocate that is what she meant. But again, it to me is a mistake not to rank our threats and not to focus on those, as I stated, Angus. And of course, the threats are not only to Canada, but the US, the UK, and other parts of the world. With our federal election coming up next year and the evidence that there's been meddling in the leadership campaign of the Conservative Party of Canada, among other politics, not only from India, but from China and Russia and Iran, I think that this is a very big issue that needs to be focused on, that can't be just pushed off that they're only interested in the Sikh diaspora. I think they have much more interest and a much bigger vision of what they're doing here in Canada.
Yeah, I think that this is quite an interesting angle to this story, and one particular perspective that I sort of pick out from this is that, yeah, clearly we've reported on a lot of evidence that have come out from certainly the first part of this inquiry, which has proved that India is actively and very proactively interfering in Canadian politics, society, commerce, economics, everything, not just Canada, of course, across the whole West. But what is interesting that I think came out of this is quite an interesting angle to this, is that, and I would agree with this, is that India are focusing on the pro-Khalistan movement almost to the point of obsession. And I think this is true. I think this is actually happening. And this is occurring right across the West, whether it's the US, whether it's here in the UK or even Australia, is that essentially all this boils down to is a simple battle. There is a war going on between the Brahmanical rulers of India and the Sikh diaspora, the Sikh population, the Sikh community. Primarily because, and this always comes back to a question that I always ask all my podcast guests, why do you think the Indian state, and by that read the Brahmins, why do they hate the Sikhs so much? What is it about the Sikh community that they obsess about? And the answer really always comes back down to the simple fact that the Sikh community is the greatest threat to Brahmanical control of India, because it's the Sikh community that have historically recognised the Brahmins for what they are and recognised the fact that India, the Indian population, are essentially enslaved under this caste system, under Brahmanical rule. And of course, being that vanguard, that one community that is standing up to this oppression, that is calling out this oppression and injustice, they are putting their heads above the parapet and making themselves as a target. And the Brahmins, who are extraordinarily powerful, of course, in India, they see the Sikh community as their biggest threat, and therefore they have been obsessively targeting the Sikhs around the world. By that, of course, again, read the pro-Khalistan movement, who, of course, are at that sharp end of the community, who are standing up for everything that Sikhi stands for, everything that Khalistan will stand for, and everything that Khalistan stands for is diametrically opposed to everything that the Brahmins stand for. So I think, that what's coming out of this inquiry is that the Brahmins are pursuing an obsessive agenda to destroy the Sikh community, and particularly the Khalistan community, because they are the biggest threat. And funnily enough, and ironically enough, they are doing this to the point of actually acting outside the interests of India as a nation. They are bringing the India as a nation, their reputation, into disrepute. They are actually damaging and undermining the credibility of what could be a potential superpower in their obsessive pursuit of pro-Khalistanis. The murder of Nijar, the attempted murder of Panoon, the potential murder of Avtar Singh Kandar, potentially amongst many others. The actual illegal detention of Jagtar Singh Johal, Amritpal Singh, all the pro-Khalistanis, again, is damaging their reputation as a nation. They're damaging their so-called democratic credentials, all for the sake of pursuing this obsessive agenda to try and destroy the Khalistan movement. It's not doing India as a nation any favours. It's certainly doing nothing for the people of India as a whole. It's actually damaging their whole reputation around the world. It's damaging Indian interests. The West are now looking at India as a potential pariah state because they're saying, well, it's not really this so-called democracy that it calls itself. So yeah, I think this inquiry, James, is pulling out a whole new thread of this agenda that is highlighting this one very key thing, is that the Brahmins are obsessively chasing the Khalistanis, and it is actually doing India no favours. It is actually damaging India's reputation.
Absolutely, Angus. And, we'll have to watch that and see how it progresses in terms of this inquiry. We'll keep our eyes on it and we'll keep reporting on it. Just taking a quick detour from that for a quick moment, I just wanted to also mention that tomorrow night I'll be bringing a report. We'll be talking about United Sikhs and how they are bringing Seva to the major impacted areas of North Carolina and Florida. And if you're able to assist, they do have information on their Facebook page. You can just search for the United Sikhs and find out what they need and how you can help. We'll have, as I said, we'll have more information tomorrow night on that as they roll up their sleeves and I guess their pant legs in those storm-ridden and flooded out areas, because the floods are still continuing to rise. They haven't dissipated because of the conditions there, Angus.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on now quickly as time runs out. I'll go on to my first story, and it's actually great news. I reported last week of various meetings and, of course, the convention that happened last month of the Sikh Federation UK, who held a very important, very powerful convention to discuss the formation of the unification of the various disparate parts of the Sikh community into a united front to push the agenda of Khalistan. Well, I am delighted to report that as of yesterday, a formal press announcement was made, and Sikh organisations have finally formally announced the formation of the Sikh Federation International. And they have they've launched their own logo, which is a fabulous basic logo, but it does formalise this unification of all the various elements formed into one. And the Sikh Federation International, which draws in organisations from the UK, across Europe, Canada, USA, and of course Australia. And the organisations have gathered from around the world to announce this formation of the Sikh Federation International with the aim of restoring Khalsa Ji Ke Bol Bale, which is Sikh sovereignty in the current world order. In order to achieve this, the Sikh Federation International will engage in diplomacy and advocacy around the world to support the establishment of course, the independent sovereign state of Khalistan. There will be various conferences, press conferences, broadcast live across various social media. That will include many representatives from around the world, but will include Amrit Singh from here in the UK, and of course Dabinderjit Singh, who interviewed last week about it, one of the key advisors to the Sikh Federation UK, Bayajit Singh Australia, by Gurmit Singh in Europe, and over in your neck of the woods, James by Maninder Singh and by Prabjot Singh. And they will also speak, they spoke yesterday at the Guru Arjan Dev Ji Gurdwara in Derby here in the UK, that I believe was broadcast live. And now today is a key day as well, because UK parliamentarians, there is a get-together here in the UK Parliament in one of the meeting rooms in the British Parliament in London. in which various issues will be raised, of course, including transnational repression, political interference by the Indian government here in the UK, and, of course, this formation of the Sikh Federation International. Now, there was quite a detailed press release that was issued overnight by the Sikh Federation International. Again, I'll just quickly cherry pick through the key elements of this, but it does set out a very clear agenda, a very powerful statement, and this really is the Sikh community setting out its stall to the world, to the United Nations, to global governments, saying, here we are, this is what we stand for, we now exist, and you can now come and talk to us, and we will come and talk to you as now a united front. We have our list of I was going to say demands. It sounds a bit arrogant. They're not demands. They're just this is a list of what we stand for. This is a list of what we expect, and this is a list of what Khalistan will represent and how it will be formed and what it will stand for in the new global world order. So they have said that, once again, Sikh organisations have gathered around the world to restore the Khalsaji Ke Bol Bale, Sikh sovereignty, in the current world order. To achieve this, the organisation will engage in diplomacy and advocacy around the world to support the establishment of Khalistan. Now, the objectives of the Federation clearly demonstrate what it calls a holistic vision to simultaneously develop internal panthic capacity as well as establishing effective mechanisms of global advocacy. Now, in order to strengthen its capacity, the Federation is committed to engage with the Sangat, the Sikh Sangat globally, celebrating the legacy of the Sikh struggle, initiating internal dialogue with other panthic groups to facilitate working relationships that collectively strengthen global advocacy for Khalistan. So basically, this is a very clear message to the global diaspora, the global community, saying we are now the central core of the Khalistan movement, that everything should be channeled through this organisation so that it can form a united and single message to anybody who wants to engage with Khalistan when it arrives. So they say that alongside developing solidarity and cooperation with other movements and oppressed peoples, the Sikh Federation International will also document India's ongoing human rights violations and transnational repression. So, of course, they will be documenting and making sure that everything is held in one place. The evidence is documented so that India can ultimately be held to account on the global stage, of course. And most importantly, the Federation intends to build a consensus around the proposed governance and administrative structures envisioned in Khalistan, so as to effectively articulate the unique vision of Sikh sovereignty in South Asia. And establishing this baseline, the Federation intends to mobilise international support for the establishment of Khalistan. So again, it is saying here we're setting out that how Khalistan will be administered. Of course, establishing a new country is a fairly ambitious process, but it does require the establishment of a huge amount of complex infrastructure that will form the new nation. And everything, again, will go through this central core, this central organisation. And the Sikh Federation International will be led by an international council of Sikh leaders appointed by the respective national federations of the UK, Europe, Canada, USA and Australia. The council will be made up of recognised Khalistani leadership from around the world. These are individuals who've been exiled from their homeland due to their direct participation, leadership and ongoing support for the struggle since 1984. The work of the Council will be implemented and supported by a secretariat which will be responsible for coordinating their local units to execute and implement the strategic objectives set by the Council. So again, this is setting out the infrastructure, the management, should we call it, the managerial infrastructure of Khalistan. This is setting out this cascading hierarchy that will be formed around the world. There will be a global central council who will organise everything, and their diktats will then be cascaded down through the various levels of management in the Sikh Council to administer to the various global parts of it. Of course, it's happening in the diaspora. This, of course, cannot happen in India at this stage. And for those who've watched the interview with Devinjit Singh, who's a key member of this council, this organisation, that he calls it a dotted line to the Punjab. Of course, it can't be a solid line to the Punjab because, of course, those in the Punjab advocating for this are under direct threat from the Indian government. Of course, India has a very questionable democracy. It does not it won't countenance any pro-Khalistan discussions or any talk. Literally, it becomes a criminal offence, any talk of secessionism. So unfortunately, the International Council has to have what they call this dotted line, where they will keep those in the Punjab in the loop, so to speak. So they will, of course, be part of this, but formally and officially they can't form an active role in this at this stage, because, of course, their lives literally could be at risk by doing so. And so, excuse me, and they do refer to this, given the increasing political turmoil and instability within the Punjab, it is imperative that Sikhs living around the world take steps to develop collective leadership structures. These shifts make it clear that the risks of geopolitical competition and conflict in the region are increasing. This region becomes increasingly important, as we've talked about on a regular basis. The Guru Khalsa Panth must be organised as a global stakeholder. So that what they're saying is that this federation is profoundly important in the global scheme of things. It will form an important core in that region. Khalistan will be a fundamental ally to those in the West, because, of course, the growing threat of conflict in that region. We have China over the border, we have India and Pakistan, the tensions thereof. Of course, Khalistan will form such an important strategic ally, so that, again, they're setting out their stall, they're setting out what Khalistan will stand for and how it will fit in the global world order, the global geopolitics of it. Because they say they will proactively participate in shaping the future of the region and the broader world order. The political objective of the Federation International is an independent sovereign Khalistan, of course, and an international order based on Sikh ideals, which respects the inherent sovereignty of the Khalsa, the Patshahi, and remains committed to Sabat Dabala, that's welfare of all, and the Garib di Rakaya, Javane di Bakaya, protection of the weak, destruction of the tyrants for all, as India's volatile behaviour continues to demonstrate that it is an unreliable global actor and a serious threat to stability in the region. So the establishment of an independent sovereign Khalistan is a necessary first step towards ensuring peace, justice and prosperity in Punjab and beyond. A very, very powerful statement. I think the Khalistan movement has told the world in very loud and no uncertain terms that here we are. We now exist. We are now a formal organisation. That once again, another stepping stone is put in place, James, towards the establishment of Khalistan. I think, again, it's another wake-up call to India that the Khalistan movement is not just here to stay. It is serious. It is now being taken seriously by the global superpowers, the other global superpowers, including China, who are all taking the Khalistan movement seriously. To be taken seriously, it does need to set up all the formal machinations, the formal engine. It needs to set up the formal infrastructure to be taken seriously. Here it is. Those first steps are being put in place, and it's a very exciting time, James, to be part of this. These are literally the first formations, the first formulations of the new Khalistan.
Well, and they say, Angus, strength in numbers and, diversification is good in business, but here it's not so much. It's great to see unity coming together, because that's going to give them a much more focused path in order to achieve the goal.
Indeed. So we'll keep an eye on the story. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. We, of course, have this parliamentary meeting today going on. There will be reports coming back from that. So as soon as we get more information, as things move forward, we'll let you know. But this is worth following, because this is quite exciting stuff going on now. This is the legal formalities falling into place to make Khalistan happen, certainly and it's bringing into the crosshairs of the United Nations now, which is great. So, okay, let's move on to my second story. And this is, again, a very positive story. Things moving forward here in the UK from a political perspective about Jagtar Singh Johal, amongst many others. We have several British citizens, actually, as it turns out, who are illegally and arbitrarily detained around the world. Jagtar Singh Johal being one of those key stories. And the British government have been, as we've said in the past, very silent, quite shamefully, about the story of Jagtar Singh Johal, and very silent about the whole Indian issue, and silent about the Khalistan issue. And in fact, we've talked quite often about the collaboration between India and the British state. And again, the shameful actions of the British government, particularly the last government, the Conservative government, but now we have this new Labour government who have been, well, I would say it's early days yet, but I'm deeply suspicious now that they're in government. Again, they've fallen silent about a lot of these issues. But I'm delighted to report that a few days ago, a new group, a cross-party group has been formulated to pressure the British government and in turn the British state about people like Jagtar Singh Johal. Now, of course, 6 Britons have been held for years without fair trial in various countries that have close trading links with the British nation. And now there are fresh hopes of their release as this cross-party group of MPs launches a pressure group to fight for their freedom. Now, family members and friends of 4 of the detainees have accused the Foreign Office, which handles their case as well as trade deals, of caring more about protecting diplomatic relations than the freedom of their loved ones. Now, of course, this reflects an argument that we have talked about on a regular basis, is that human rights have always been trumped by commerce, by trade deals, by dollars, basically. And we said regularly that the British government, when it comes to choosing between trade deals or human rights and democratic principles, that it always seems to choose trade deals. Now, this new cross-party group, which includes Tory MP Alicia Kearns, Labour peer Baroness Helena Kennedy, they will call for a special envoy for hostage affairs, a role which is independent to the Foreign Office. Now, this is an important distinction. The Foreign Office, of course, is part of the British state. The Foreign Office is the entity, the body that deals with the trade deals, that deals also with the human rights issues and how we deal with foreign countries like India. Now, this special envoy for hostage affairs, this will be independent of the British state and therefore will not be tainted, will not be influenced by the agenda of the British state, which of course in turn is influenced by India and the pressure from India. Among the nearly 24 politicians who've signed up in support are Lord Alf Dubs, he's a Tory MP, that's a Conservative on the right wing, Tory MP John Whittingdale and Baroness Margaret Hodge. As Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy promised to create the role should he be appointed into office. Now, yeah, of course, David Lammy, who is now the British Foreign Secretary, he promised to create this role. Now that he's in government, well, all eyes are now pointing at him. You promise this, now deliver this role. Now, Ms Kearns, who's the chair and also the shadow foreign minister for foreign affairs, says the special envoy role is more urgent than ever as there is now an industrialisation of taking British citizens as hostages for leverage in state-to-state relations. So what she's saying, and this is an important statement, is she's saying that foreign nations like India are now taking British citizens as hostage deliberately so that they can use this as a negotiating tactic to strong-arm Britain into agreeing trade deals, because they know that Britain will always agree to a trade deal, if we blackmail them by holding their citizens hostages, because clearly the British state is a soft touch when it comes to this. Clearly, dollars are more important to the British state than human rights. So, all those Britons highlighted by the politicians have seen trials based on no evidence or no basis in law, according to the United Nations and human rights groups. Of course, Jagtar Singh Johal, been held in prison for nearly 7 years now. He's being held under very questionable legal actions, and again, it flies in the face of the rule of law or any normal norms of democracy. And he further said, these authoritarian states now know full well that in order to get the British government to drop the case, they only need to dangle some sort of trade investment. Yeah, again, pointing out this very simple fact. The British government is easily persuaded, blackmailed, whatever you want to call it, choose your word, that, human rights come second to trade deals. Doesn't matter if we imprison British citizens. We know that they'll always give in to the argument if you dangle a trade deal in front of their eyes. Gurpreet Singh, who was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a couple of weeks ago. Gurpreet Singh, that's Jaggi's brother, who's been held in India since November 2017 on charges, or trumped up charges of terrorism, said, I think there's a misunderstanding among the British public that if a British national goes missing, the government will do what they can to bring them back. Absolutely, Gurpreet is totally right. Is that there is an expectation that we as British people expect that if one of our own is detained illegally abroad, that the British government will move heaven and earth to free them. That is not the case. Right. The British government only cares about trade deals. The UK government, including Mr Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, has condemned Jaggi's arrest as arbitrary. Well, he did that before he was elected. He's now, since being elected, refused to repeat that statement. Since his detention, however, the government has engaged in £225 billion worth of trade with India and is negotiating a new deal estimated to be worth £40 billion. Well, here we go again. It's all about money, isn't it? It's not about human rights. Gurpreet continued to say Jagtar is a thorn in this trade deal that the UK wants with India. That's the bottom line. Here, the deal with India is worth billions for years to come. Jagtar is just one person in between that. So what Gurpreet's saying quite clearly excuse me, is that the whole situation of Jagtar is an embarrassment. It's a bit of a thorn in the side of India-British relations, and it's a bit of a nuisance for the British government because the British government wants a trade deal. They don't really want to talk about Jagtar because that's a little bit of an embarrassment, isn't it? Chris Paget, he's the brother-in-law. Sorry, James.
Well, I was just going to say, and something that possibly the British could learn from Canada's case with Omar Khadr that cost the Canadian government $10.5 million because he was a minor locked in Guantanamo, even though he admitted to playing a role in the death of soldiers. So again, it's something that is a very contentious issue in Canada. It cost millions of dollars for not defending his human rights in Guantanamo. And this is something that the British government needs to look at because it could potentially, with Jaggi being locked up there, it could definitely potentially have a civil impact in terms of civil litigation. Our system is based on the British tort system of law, so we're very similar that way, Angus.
Indeed, yeah, and actually Jaggi's brother Gurpreet is currently taking the British government to court because it has evidence emerged very early on that Jaggi was tortured. The evidence was plain to see. There's no ambiguity about it. So as a result, the British government is legally obliged to take action against India about a British citizen being tortured. And the British government have done absolutely nothing in nearly 7 years. So Gurpreet is now taking the British government to court. So he's not only fighting the Indian government, he's actually having to fight our own government. I mean, it's absolutely shameful. And Chris Paget, he's the brother-in-law of one of the other prisoners, Mr Cornelius. He said the Foreign Office seems to have adopted a policy that once you deem a country to be a strategic ally, essentially your job goes no further than not to upset it. And this is exactly what is happening with Jaggi. It's absolutely shameful. So, and he also continued to say, I worry that this is exactly replicating what the Tory government has done for 3 years, referring to the prioritisation of trade. Britain and Egypt's trade is worth £4.8 billion annually. Of course, we now have a British citizen imprisoned illegally in Egypt as well. And Ms Kearns said, she's the chair of the group, said that despite complaints from affected families, there remains enormous institutional reluctance in the Foreign Office to change. These words are significant because, as I continually say, there seems to be an agenda with the British government to protect India and Indian interests at all costs, to the cost of human rights, and particularly the Sikh community. Enormous institutional reluctance. This is the formal phrase that she used. I think that's a euphemism basically saying that the British state is colluding with the Indian state. And she continued to say, this is a test for Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. Can he overcome this institutional reluctance? Officials will say no to him. It's for him to say, well, I've promised this, I want to bring it in. Go on and do it. So she's saying, look, if you stand up for what your principles that you were elected on, then you will turn to the British state and say, no. We will free these people on a point of principle, human rights principle. It's not about trade deals, it's about human rights. So she's pointing, as this group are absolutely doing this in this new role, this envoy, the role of this envoy is to point the finger at David Lammy and say, is it human rights or is it trade deals that are your principles? And Tim Roker, the Labour MP for Macclesfield and vice chair of the group, said, he underlined Mr Lammy's promises to create this special envoy Labour MPs want to see the government move the dial on this. Now, when approached for comment on this story, and this is a story written by one of the British newspapers called The Independent, they approached the Foreign Office for a comment, and they said, the government is committed to strengthening support for British nationals, including through the appointment of a new envoy. They did not respond to further inquiry about whether that meant the Foreign Office was committed to creating a special envoy for hostage affairs. David Lammy was also approached for comment, and as of 5 days later, no comment. So I'm afraid that the British government, once again, yeah, it's easy in opposition when you're fighting to be elected to make all these big promises. But once again, you move into government and what happens, and Gurpreet, Jaggi's brother, said this the same, exactly the same, is that once you get into power, they meet this, quote, enormous institutional reluctance. Again, this euphemism for basically saying that the British state is working hand in hand with the Indian state. Why, we don't know. We have our theories. But James, once again, this is, well, I think the good news of this story is that despite this institutional reluctance, the pressure is now building from the bottom upwards. It's grassroots. It's our people in our audience. It is the grassroots people in the communities, the Sikh communities and other communities affected directly by this, who are pushing upwards through their elected representatives, through their MPs. And this is why everybody in our audience must get out there and campaign and pressure these people, because this pressure pushes upwards. It is now moving. And here in the UK, we've now got this new group dedicated to pressuring the government. These are high-level people. These are MPs who will pressure the government to taking action. The government will have no choice but to take action, or at least answer. They are facing accountability. So please, to every one of you out there in our audience around the world, you have the power, believe it or not. You're not just a number. You're not just a nobody, as one of our commenters once said. You actually have the power. You have a voice, albeit small, but when these voices combine as they do, they're channeled upwards through your local representatives, your local congressmen, congresswomen, MPs, and they in turn form their groups which pressure upwards. James, it's really important that everybody uses these democratic powers to force the governments to take action. It can happen. We are seeing it happen, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And it's like the Khalistan movement always tells people, the pen is mightier than the sword. Make those letters or write those letters and get them to your political representatives.
Exactly it is. Exactly it is. So, yeah, if you're in the audience and you are politically motivated, get out there, get your voice heard. It really does matter, and it does make a difference. Okay, we are rapidly rushing out of time, so I'm going to zip through my final story. And this is last week there was another assassination of a prominent Sikh activist in the Punjab, and it has sent shockwaves around the global community. This was Gurpreet Singh. He was returning after campaigning for a Sarpanch candidate in Faridkot constituency. Two guys on a motorcycle opened fire at him, severely injuring him. He was hit by 4 bullets. He was rushed to Guru Gobind Singh Medical College in Faridkot, where he unfortunately was pronounced dead. The attackers fled the scene. Gurpreet Singh of Haryana was a member of social reform group Waris Punjab Day. Yes, this is the same group as Amrit Pal Singh. He was also an associate of the late leader Shahid Deep Sidhu. In the last 2 years, at least 6 prominent Sikh figures vocal on topics, particularly like Khalistan, Punjabi rights and Indian state corruption, have been murdered, leading to a geopolitical fallout regarding India's anti-Sikh transnational repression. Now, what's particularly interesting about this, this did happen a few days ago. And this is where, again, the finger of suspicion starts pointing once again that there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. Clearly, again, there's an agenda at play here, not least the fact that it's yet another pro-Khalistani activist who's been shot dead in the streets of the Punjab. Again, it points to a very clear agenda going on in this region. But the shooters escaped not only when counterintelligence officials were present in the area, but also with the Faridkot police highly active as part of a cordon and search operations initiated across the state. Many news outlets had reported the heightened police activity on the day of the murder. Suspicions are further being raised about the killing after the uncommon role of India's counterintelligence in the investigation. Gurpreet Singh is one of several Sikh activists murdered in the last 2 years in cases linked to Indian government repression. And yeah, of course, he was linked to the social reform group War is Punjab Day. So what is interesting here is that there was a very, very high police presence in the area for we believe, unrelated reasons, is that there were a lot of police and counterintelligence officials in the whole area. The area was flooded with law enforcement people and people from the intelligence services, supposedly for another reason. And yet these gunmen, these are guys on a motorbike armed with high caliber weaponry who shot dead a Khalistani activist and then fled the scene and still remain free. Very suspicious. Again, a lot of stories at play here, a lot of agenda at play here, James. But again, one has to be very concerned that it's yet another War is Punjab Day figure who's been targeted. It's another Khalistani who's been shot dead in the streets. This isn't simple gang warfare. This points to political motivations, doesn't it, James?
Absolutely, and keeping in mind also that the agencies there also utilize the gangs for their dirty work as well. So,
yeah. Okay, in the name of time, we're going to move on now to our comment section. And we had a very long, very considered comment from K. Singh after one of our stories last week. And it was quite a critical, quite a brutal comment, actually. And I wanted to address this comment directly, actually, because there's a lot of points raised in this. Unfortunately, we didn't really have time. I would actually like to pick apart this comment piece by piece, because, again, there's a lot of points in this. But I will actually I'll pull up one or two points that this gentleman raises, because it was a very, very long and considered critique of our show. And he says that the podcast is what he calls degenerating into a regurgitation of Western talking points. And he refers to what we talked about the other day, James, the story about the Maldives and Ratan Tata, the death of Tata. Not only does this dictum violate a dictum of Guru Gobind Singh, it obscures the fact that Tata benefited greatly from his proximity to power, and we failed to mention that what Tata did for Sikhs, basically nothing. So, okay, let's just, I will address this first point, a regurgitation of Western talking points. I would actually, my response to this is very clear, is that I think you're misunderstanding the purpose of this show. We are not a simple news outlet. We're not reporting all the news stories of the day. There's plenty of other news outlets that exist for that in both English and Punjabi. The clue is in the title of our show. It is perspectives. This show is essentially, it's me and James, two middle-aged Western white men who are on I would call it a journey of learning, a journey of education. Now, as of, a couple of years ago, James and I knew very little about Sikhi, about the Sikh community. And this whole show is dedicated around getting to understand and learn from a Western perspective what it is to be a Sikh, what it is to have suffered for decades, if not longer, as a Sikh. And it is about us learning from a Western perspective what that is all about, what has happened. It is learning about the stories that are now coming out of India and the Punjab. It is learning about what the diaspora, what matters to the diaspora, and how the stories that come out of that region affect the diaspora. And again, once again, it is about our perspective on this. So when you say it's a regurgitation of Western talking points, yes, it is. We are Westerners talking about these stories and our perspectives on that. The whole story about Ratan Tata, well, yeah, we did. I wouldn't say we lionised, but he was a key figure. He was an important figure that affected the West as much as India. And again, I'm not going to defend that point. We don't have time. But there's a key point here that you make. These stories have an implicit pro-Indian bias. Yeah, now, I think you misunderstand again here. We are unapologetically, or certainly I am unapologetically pro-Indian. I love India. As I've said on many occasions, I love the Indian people. I love its diversity. I love its culture. I particularly love its cuisine. I love many things about India. What I am anti is anti-Brahmin, which I understand you are too. There's a big difference here. I'm not anti-Hindu, as many of in our audience are, for very good reason, because they have suffered directly under the Hindus. I personally am not anti-Hindu, but we do call out Hindus who are deeply wrong, who cause injustice, etc. We are, James and I, and I'll speak on behalf of you on this, James, we are both Westerners whose values align with Sikhi. That is why we are passionate about what we do. Our values align with what Sikhi stands for on many levels, in that we align with a fight against injustice, a fight for the truth. We are particularly aligned about the whole concept of Sikhi and about Khalistan, etc., etc. And I don't believe, Mr. Singh, that you are a regular viewer of our channel, because if you were, you would understand what we stand for. And everything that you've you critiqued us about on here, I would throw back and say, no, I think you are deeply wrong about what you are accusing us, me and James, of, etc., etc. And again, we unfortunately don't have time to dig further into that. And you do talk about other stories, about why didn't we cover these stories? Well, for many reasons, and again, we don't have time to go into that. But what I would say is, if you want us to cover these stories, send me an email. Send a message at satledgetv.com, Send us an email about things that you think we should be covering. And I say regularly, every single show, if there's something you think we should be covering, tell us about it. So if you're critiquing us for not bringing up these stories, it might well be that we didn't know about these stories. So instead of pulling us up, send us an email and say, please cover this story. And incidentally, Gurdas Man, we did cover this story. Again, if you were a regular viewer, you'd have seen that we did cover the story of Gurdas Man, and we will be covering it again tomorrow, because actually we have a big update about Gurdas Man. There was our very own channel, the people from our very own channel, yesterday were at a protest about Gurdas Man. We've had pictures coming in overnight from that protest. Surinder Singh, one of our very own people on this channel, was there protesting about him. So unfortunately, again, if you were a regular viewer of our channel, you would know this. And finally, your point about, for your readers, I recommend the 800-page book, The Political Science, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, thank you for that. I also recommend the viewers read that book. I think, unfortunately, again, you're missing the point of what we are and what this channel is and what our show is all about. And I'll wrap up quickly, because, again, we spent too much time with this comment. Is that, unfortunately, our viewers, many of our viewers are very busy people. They do not have time, much as they would love to, much as I would love to, read an 800-page well-researched book or article that you talk about, well-researched articles. We do not have time to sit down in our lives and read long academic treatises about Sikhi or about the current political situation, etc., etc. We would love to. Unfortunately, people need to dip into shows like ours just to get a summary of these things. And thank heavens for people like yourself who do have the time to read these things. If you have the ability to summarise it into short summaries for people then who can pick up the important points, great. But there are also a section of the community who do have time. And thank heavens for there are people like this who have the time to read these things so that that knowledge can be passed on. But we are not that, excuse me, we are not the channel that have time for a 3-hour show to talk about the detail in things like that. And unfortunately, you need to understand that maybe we're not the channel for you, Mr. K. Singh. I think you're missing the point of what we're about. Unfortunately, there's lots more I'd like to talk about that. But I would say is that don't be blinded by your own ideology, that you turn people against Sikhi just for not getting it right, not aligning with the purity of your own ideology. And again, there's many examples of this, is that there are many people who are aligned with Sikhi in the West. They don't necessarily align with the purity of the ideology, but they are your allies. So don't turn against those who align with you. Don't turn against allies. You need everybody on side, as many people as you can, to support the whole concept of Khalistan if you want to make it happen. And you write, this is a struggle between the Sikhs and the Brahmins. And if you were a regular watcher of our show, you will know that every single podcast, virtually every single show that we do, supports this battle against the Brahmins. We've already mentioned it in this show already, is that we stand in support of the Sikh community, and we point out exactly what's going on in India. We point out the enslavement of the ordinary Indian under the Brahmanical dominance. That is what we stand for on this show. And again, I think you've missed the point of this show. But I would finally say thank you for this comment. Thank you for the time you took to make this comment. I hope what I've said sets the record straight. And I hope you do continue to watch our show. And I would also say, please do email us if you have stories like this, because we will be delighted to report on these stories. If you can summarise these long stories that you refer to, again, I would be delighted to repeat those summaries, to regurgitate, to use your word, to regurgitate to our audience in a more manageable, smaller package. So thank you once again for your comment. James, I don't know if you've got anything to say to that one.
It was a well thought out email or posting, and I appreciated that. But also just keep in mind that we are here to try and bridge a gap between the Western world and the Sikh culture, to bring an understanding and acceptance, because through that, as we reach out to the Western world, it can help to bring down the racism, the misunderstanding, the misconceptions, and encourage more support outside of the Sikh diaspora for an independent and successful Khalistan.
Indeed, absolutely. I think that's right. We are essentially, we were brought in to bridge the story between the Sikh community and the white Westerner, let's call it. So, as I say, don't reject us. You know, we're trying to align with you. We're better as an ally. That's all I would say. But thank you very much indeed for that comment. And if actually members of our audience have got your own view on that, your own opinion on that, do let us know in the comments, because I'm again curious to know how our audience feels about that comment as well. Right, must rush through, unfortunately, because we're well behind time now. Amrit Saravar says, we're talking about, this is back to the film of Kalra, the biopic of Kalra. If this film's team dares to put the film on social platforms, then they will be banned in India, or banned to make any film in the future. Yeah, we said, James, we recommended, look, don't cut parts of this film, Punjab 95. Just release it and let it circulate. But yeah, I think, as you rightly point out, unfortunately, that means that the filmmakers may be then blacklisted in India, James. That's maybe not the best advice.
Exactly. I get it. And there's a lot of movies that have been edited for international markets, but this one could have ramifications that go backwards on them.
Yeah, and Rajveer Parmar follows up with, again, I think aligned with what we were saying, is that actually why don't you essentially go out there, release the film as is, get it certified outside India, and refers to the US, Canada, the UK, and it means you could bypass those restrictions imposed by the CBFC. Put it in the Toronto International Film Festival, etc., and it would reach this global Punjabi Sikh diaspora, but could also increase international awareness. I think absolutely good point. Oh, it's a balance to what Amrit recommends as well. I don't know what the right answer is there. If you're the filmmakers, it's your call. It's a brave call to make. All I would say is good luck to those guys. Thank you for putting this film together. And I think everybody should get out there and support this film in any way that they can, to try and get it issued in its original form as much as possible. And Amrit comes back with the final comment on this story is, in India, it doesn't matter who's in power, there is no justice for Sikhs. I think that is absolutely right. It's clearly there is this, well, I call it a two-tier. James says, no, it's worse than that. Don't you, James? There is just no justice for Sikhs on any level.
Yeah, you know my opinion there, Angus. I'm not always the most quiet one, but you're definitely the one that likes to go off on rants about it, but we share those opinions.
Yeah, and I think the simple answer to that one is ask Amrit Pal Singh or Jagtar Singh Jahal their opinion on that, and I think they'll have a few words to say about it.
That's very true.
Right, I love this comment, Jim Walker. Welcome to the CIA MI6 sponsored divisive agenda. No facts, no proof, just a smooth English accent to make you believe propaganda is the truth. Just pure swine hogwash. Oh, I don't know about your English accent, James, but at least mine is smooth, apparently.
You smooth talker, you.
All I would say, Jim Walker, is that I have been so rude about the CIA and the MI6 that I think it's very unlikely that I'm being sponsored by our relative security services, because I've been quite critical of them. I'm more concerned about what they might be up to me than the other way around. So, but thank you for the comment, and I'm delighted that you enjoy our propaganda. And I'm delighted that you love my smooth English accent. So thank you for that. And I do hope you keep watching us, because we enjoy your comments. Balbir Singhil says, this is the story of Indira Gandhi. Watch this podcast. Oh, good heavens. I'd say to our audience, if you haven't watched this podcast, go out there and watch it. It's fascinating. Dr. Grinder Grewal, Singh Grewal, he talked about Indira Gandhi, Operation Shanti. It is a shocking revelation. Operation Shanti was planned after Operation Blue Star. You think Operation Blue Star was bad? Just wait till you hear what Operation Shanti was planning. Essentially, Indira Gandhi was planning to raze, that's R-A-Z-E, raze the Punjab to the ground in basically an air-bombed fireball. She decided that because after Operation Blue Star, she was losing popularity, elections were coming up at the end of the year, she was losing support, she realised she needed to do something radical to shut the Sikh community up. So she was planning in November the 8th, to essentially raze the villages of the Punjab to the ground by a false flag plan operation to say that the Pakistan army were invading, that there were skirmishes happening along the border with Pakistan, along the Punjab, and essentially she was going to send in the army pretending to fight Pakistan. In fact, all she was going to do was just firebomb all the Punjabi villages and mass murder hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Sikhs in the process. Unbelievable, this Operation Shanti. The evidence is out there. We'll come on to that in a moment. Balbir Singh, she was a devil. Just watch this podcast. If you don't believe me, watch this podcast. Dr. Grewal sets it out, all the evidence, everything that was planned. As I say, I'm just quite speechless about the course of history that could have been changed. People don't realise how significant, had it happened, and this is the reason she was assassinated, to stop this operation happening. And well done to the two Shaheeds who assassinated Indira Gandhi. They stopped the potential massacre of potentially millions of Sikhs. It was shocking. Anyway, Sukhwant says the main person was R.K. Dhawan. Yeah, the advisor, one of the key advisors to Indira Gandhi and Nehru. The secrets went to his grave. He knew all the dirty laundry that went on. Absolutely. And again, please watch that podcast if you want to know what that's all about. And Ashley Kandar, funnily enough, one of our regular critics, Ashley Kandar says, are there any sources for this information? And you do agree with the description of Indira Gandhi, but why do Sikhs in the Punjab continue to support the Congress Party? Very good question, actually. That is a good question. And thank you for that comment. And Amrik Singh also said with B Singh, this wasn't in direct response, but I lumped these together. The evidence actually has been written in various books. There is a lot of evidence out there about Operation Shanti. Sangat Singh wrote a book called Sikhs in History, and he worked in Indian intelligence. He reveals some truth about the operation. And B Singh says, the book, My Feudal Lord by Mrs. Durrani, confirms Operation Shanti. So the evidence is out there, James. I'm struggling for the words, because actually what came out in this podcast was just... literally, when I say it could have changed the course of history, talking about poking your stick into a hornet's nest, she essentially it could have potentially spiraled into another war with Pakistan, James.
Oh, absolutely. Not to mention the international ramifications of blaming a foreign country for such an attack. I mean, just horrific.
And we talk about this obsessive agenda between the Brahmins and the Sikhs. Again, Operation Shanti was just another outlet of this obsessive desire to destroy the Sikh community, destroy the Sikh nation. And again, in the cost, the collateral of doing that, potentially, Operation Shanti was setting off a war between two nations, at the very least. Never mind massacring millions of Sikhs in the process. So, So I do, once again, I'll just repeat it, watch that podcast. The implications of Operation Shanti were just unbelievable. Anyway, the final comment from Gurpreet Brar says, save Punjab and Sikhi, and Punjab only one way Khalistan. Khalistan Zindabad. We always like to finish, James, on this note, and we must unfortunately wrap the show up on this because we are well over time, as always. But thank you for that comment. Khalistan Zindabad, indeed. But you have, of course, been watching Perspectives. Please don't forget to keep those comments coming in. Even the critical ones, thank you for the critical ones. We do like to talk about them. We are, as we say, we are very thick-skinned, and we are totally open to criticisms and comments likewise. But of course, if you have positive comments, as many of you do send in, thank you for your support. Thank you for positive comments. Thank you for your very educational comments and letting us know about things that we don't otherwise cover or that we don't know about. Again, much appreciated for all of those. And of course, you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything that you would like to let us know that you don't want to put in the public domain. But unfortunately, we must draw things to a close for another day. Thank you so much for watching Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.